This is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly Top 3, the top 3 things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of October 28th, 2024. The weekly Top 3 is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our 3 issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages. Also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly Top 3 also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top 3 issues are these. First, we discuss the broader implications of a recent op-ed in the ADN about the impact of government picking winners and losers. Second, we discuss why those claiming to be fighting for Alaska families and the Alaska economy are in fact doing the reverse when it comes to the revenue side. And third, we explain the irony of Governor Dunleavy and others pushing for AIDEA to spend even more on, let's be honest, useless ANWR leases. And now, let's join Michael.
We got some big stuff here, and you dropped me a metric ton of stuff to research here before we got done in the show. But let's get started with number one: the government picking winners and losers. You know, this is one of my favorite topics, so I'm sure you're just trolling me with this. But of all people to talk about this, Niels Andreessen to talk about picking winners and losers is the height of irony. But I'll let you dive into this here.
Well, it's an interesting op-ed. It's an op-ed that's in the ADN, probably in other papers as well. The headline in the ADN is "States Shouldn't Pick Winners with Property Tax Exemptions." And Niels Andreessen is the executive director of the Alaska Municipal League. And what he's picking at in this article or in this op-ed is the legislature's decision to create various exemptions to property taxes for people 65 and older, for this category, for that category, and the problem, the way Niels is raising the issue is it's a problem for local government, because what happens is when the state legislature exempts from local property taxes a certain category of property that can't be taxed. What Niels is describing is they have to take the portion that otherwise would be recovered through property taxes on that category that the state's exempted and take those revenues and recover it from the others. So it results in winners and losers. It results in a certain category, those categories selected by the legislature to be exempted, being winners because they don't have to pay property taxes, or they can pay lower property taxes. And the remainder of the municipality or the borough or whatever local government we're talking about is the losers, because they have to pick up not only their share of the cost of local government, they have to pick up the excess that's coming over from the exemption, the additional that's coming from the exemption, and they are losers. They're paying more than their share by having to pick up the burden coming over from the exemptions. And it's a plea basically by the AML, the Alaska Municipal League, for the legislature to stop doing that. It's not so much, I think Niels would say, it's not so much that maybe those categories aren't entitled to some sort of exemption or some sort of reduction, but that ought to be the decision in each locality of whether they do that, as opposed to the legislature imposing that on them. He doesn't call them unfunded costs, but you could call them unfunded costs, because those additional costs that have to be picked up by the other taxpayers as a result of the exemption of certain categories of taxpayers are unfunded costs, the burden being shifted to the localities. What I really found fascinating about this is while Nils was writing about local property tax exemptions, he was really writing about the PFD and every other revenue measure that we've got out there.
Right.
Because because when you talk about narrowing the base, which is basically what he's talking about, you're narrowing the revenue base by excluding a certain category of it and piling costs back over on those remaining in the revenue base. That's exactly what's going on with the PFD. The PFD takes money only from Alaska families. That's the only ones that are paying for the share of government above traditional revenues. It's coming directly out of Alaska families and only Alaska families. Non-residents don't pay a share of it. Oil companies aren't paying a share of the additional costs. Other corporations aren't paying a share of the additional costs. The burden is being entirely focused on Alaska families. And it's the same thing as what Nils is talking about at the localities from base shifting. And you can see it. I mean, what Ben Carpenter's sales tax does is make it absolutely transparently, as transparent as it possibly can be. Ben's sales tax is hugely broad-based. Everybody contributes to a share of the tax. And when you compare that share of costs, but when you compare that to the PFD, which is a narrow slice, you can see how much of the burden that narrow base is being shifted back over onto Alaska families by not broadening the base. It's not only true of PFDs; it's true of proposals like Elise Galvin's income tax that would only narrowly take a narrow share of the revenue from a certain segment of Alaska families, still shifting the entire share, the remaining share back over on middle and lower income Alaska families. So what Nils is really talking about is base narrowing and the problems created by base narrowing, and it's a very useful op-ed from that perspective.
Well, yeah, but it's just the irony that he cannot apply the same model to the PFD. I mean, they've been AML, the Alaska Municipal League, which Andreessen is the head of, has been one of the loudest voices in, oh yeah, take the PFD, do that. Don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. Just take the PFD and pay for all this stuff with the PFD. It's ironic that he can't apply the same model to the PFD taking as he is in all this other stuff. This has been a problem in this state for years. And in fact, quite honestly, the payback for this municipal assistance that we had for years, and they haven't funded in quite a while, I mean, a decade, I think at least, is just another example of us becoming more dependent on the state for all that stuff that we should have been paying for in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, what we've got is a huge amount, frankly, when you look at all the revenues that are being collected, we've got a huge amount of winners and losers in this state. And Nils focuses on it at the local level, but it is occurring at the state level as well. The PFD is a big example of that, and the excess burden being shifted back over only to Alaska families, non-residents getting off scot-free, oil companies getting off scot-free. But look at the Hillcorp loophole. I mean, the Hillcorp loophole is doing the same thing. The Hillcorp loophole allows this one company, because of the way its corporation happens to be organized, allows this one company to be excluded from the corporate income tax. And what that's doing is shifting that $100 million that Hillcorp otherwise would pay, shifting it back over on the PFD through PFD cuts. It's not. Sort of set aside how much we're spending and just focus for a second on how we pay for what we're spending. Assume it's less, but focus on how we're paying for it. The state is replete with narrow bases that we're forcing to pay, for a broad-based scope of government. In the second segment, I'm going to get into a discussion. Some people arguing that spending is good for spending on K through 12 is good for Alaska business, but Alaska business isn't paying for any of it because we have it all focused on the narrow base of the PFD. So Nils raises a good point. I don't argue his point, But the point is much, 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 much broader than simply just what's going on at the local level through all the exclusions being created at the state level.
Right. Now, as a libertarian, I'm all in favor of any tax exemption that we can get, just because I feel like we should just take that back, and of course there are consequences to that down the road, so it does happen. But again, just the irony here that he could see it on the one hand but can't. Taking the PFD is fine. Everything else, oh baby, don't take my sweet loot from anybody else. We need that to make your lives better, so it's all good. All right, well, that's number one. Any final thoughts, Brad, before we move on to number two here?
No, the irony of it. This shows my segment's usually all about irony. The irony of it is just huge. I mean, yes, I'm complaining about me getting bounced around as opposed to the other people who are getting bounced around.
Yeah, exactly. Kyle, who loves to stir the pot here. Let's see, what do we got here? Nils is talking about who makes the decision, not the decision. The PFD isn't a local decision. How would you like it if the feds told Alaska how to spend the realized earnings? No, I mean, I think there's no doubt that that's true. He's talking about the decision and who makes it. But again, the irony here is that he's all about the legislature making the decision on the broad base of the PFD, or the narrowing of the base of the PFD, while at the same time poo-pooing their actions on narrowing the base for property taxpayers. That's the irony, I think, there, Brad.
Well, his headline says picking winners and losers, and even if it occurs at the local level, and he argues that the local level should make the decision. Even if it occurs at the local level, you're still picking winners and losers. If you create exemptions at the local level, you're still allowing some people to win at the cost of other people not only paying their share but paying the additional share created by the exemption. So yeah, he's complaining about the legislature doing it, but the complaint really is about revenue shifting by using base narrowing mechanisms.
Yeah, so I think we're all on the same page here as far as that goes. Brad Keithley, our guest, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top three continues. We're on to number two. Why the claim to be fighting for working Alaska families and the Alaska economies is a misleading statement. Brad, I know you got some take on this. Janice Park has done a letter that is just, I just don't even know what to say here to this letter, but she's going to fight for you. That's what she says.
Janice Park is one of those two candidates. Walter Featherly is the other that I just, anytime they write something, it just grates on me because they're just so, Janice Park and Walter Featherly both want to finance all the government spending they want to do through PFD cuts, but it goes beyond that. They just keep spinning off into the ditch. But this letter the headline of it is from Janice Park, Senate candidate in Anchorage. The headline is "Fighting for Working Alaska Families," and that letter just goes through, how I want to spend. I want to spend on this. I want to spend on that. I want to spend on this. I want to help this segment of Alaska. I want to help Alaska families by spending on this segment, and it just goes on and on and on and on in that regard. Another in that category is a community perspective that Representative Maxine Dybert did for the Fairbanks News Miner, and its title is "Good Schools Are Essential to Growing a Good Economy." Good schools are essential to growing a good economy, and it's we need to spend on this, we need to spend on that, we need to spend on schools, and that's going to help Alaska families, and it's going to help the Alaska economy. And then the one I came across later, this one is just it really sums up, I think, the problem that we got going on in Alaska. This one is in the Alaska Public Media. The title is "Alaska Bush Caucus Assesses Its Impact Ahead of the Upcoming Session." And here there's 4 paragraphs that I want to highlight. Edgman, this is Bryce Edgman, Representative Bryce Edgman, an independent from Dillingham, delivered a report on last year's legislative session. "Everyone knows the cost of living is escalating," Edgman said. "It's getting really expensive on just about every possible front. We worked on addressing that as a team here, even though we've got Republicans, Democrats, Independents, what have you here. We really worked on expanding the social safety net, if you will." A half dozen other state lawmakers in attendance also joined the Bush caucus on the stage. Edgman highlighted a few of the accomplishments of specific importance to districts he and other Bush Caucus members represent, including an expansion of SNAP benefits, state SNAP benefits, or food stamp programs, and to a fund that pays for a program to keep electricity rates in rural communities down, known as the power cost equalization. All of these, Janice Parks, Maxine Diverts, and Edgman's comments are on the spending side, how they're helping Alaska families on the spending side. We're spending money that's good for you. We're spending money that we're fighting for you by fighting this to spend this money. None of them address what's going on the revenue side. And fiscal policy is two pieces that are co-equal.
Right.
How you spend and how you raise the revenue to fund your spending. And on the revenue side, we are ripping working Alaska families up one side and down the other. When Edgman says, look, we know everyone knows the cost of living is escalating, it's getting really expensive on just about every possible front. Edgman, Dybert, Park, who wants to be a legislator, all have voted for, all have proposed, and all have voted for revenue measures, the other half of the equation, revenue measures that make it absolutely the worst possible environment for working Alaska families and for Alaska businesses. So it's a very one-dimensional view of the world that these guys are talking about. Yes, okay, SNAP benefits, increased K through 12 spending, increased support for childcare services. All, yep, you're fighting for Alaska families. Then you're just taking it out of their pockets.
Right.
You're using the most regressive revenue measure ever, according to Matt Berman, ICER professor at Matt Berman. You're using the most regressive revenue measure ever to take the money right out of the pockets that you claim to be helping.
Right.
And you're not even doing it proportionately. I mean, we've been through it over and over and over. PFD cuts hit middle and lower income Alaska families much harder than they hit the top 20%. They don't hit non-residents at all, and they don't hit oil companies. So what you're doing is you're giving on the one hand and claiming that you're fighting to give more on the one hand, and you're taking it back.
Right.
On the other hand, you're undermining the very people you claim to be helping by taking it back on the other hand.
There's a theme that goes through all of these opinion pieces, Janice Park and Dibert, and this piece in the Alaska Public about Edgman and the crew. And the theme is one, we know better than you how you should live your life and how you should spend your money. And what they really are talking about there is creating and in reinforcing what's already tough in Alaska, which is the dependency state. If you know that Alaska, that everything is, the cost of living is escalating, everything's getting more expensive, so we're creating a social safety net to pay you. Wait, why don't you just give us the money that's ours to begin with and see what we can do with it on our own? We don't need you to do that. Give us our money and let us do what we need to do with our money. But they've got that nobility thing where they just know how the peasants should live. And we're going to create all these social safety net programs and create a literal cradle to grave society here in the state of Alaska, where we're all just dependent on the state to live here.
Yeah, it's I may get in trouble for this one, but it's very paternalistic. I mean, let's focus on Bryce for a moment. At the very same AFN conference where we're complaining about the federal government and how the federal government was paternalistic and the schools program and all of the bad things the federal government did over the centuries, all of which I agree with. At the same ADN conference where we're AFN conference where we're focused on that and the bad things that comes out of paternalism, Bryce makes this comment that is extremely paternalistic. We know, the state knows what you need, and we're going to provide it to you, and we are good guys because it's the same thing that those who push those paternalistic policies at the federal government level were doing at the time. They said, we know better than you how you need to live. We know better than you what you need. We know better than you how to integrate you into society and culture. And so we're gonna do this to you to make you live in this certain way. Bryce is doing exactly the same thing at the state level. We know better than you what to do with your money. And so we're going to take your money, we're going to divert PFDs, we're going to tax the PFDs, take the money into state coffers, and we're going to sprinkle it back out among you in a way that we think is a benefit to you, as opposed to self-determination, as opposed to letting the recipients determine for themselves, at least in part, determine for themselves what they need and how they can get it by giving them their share of the state's wealth that's provided by state statute. It's a very paternalistic system that we've created in this state. And since the theme of these shows, my segments are always irony, it's the ultimate irony in the same AFN conferences talking about the errors and the problems with paternalism, to be paternalistic when they talk about how the state's treating the members.
Well, no, that's the thing. They want to treat it like it's your father, it's your parent. The government is your parent, and they're here to take care of you, and they're here to to straighten you out when you're wrong and everything else. A couple of things on the Janice Park letter that got me was especially the talk about childcare, when she says every parent deserves the opportunity to pursue their career without sacrificing their children's well-being, and every child deserves an environment that supports their growth and development. This is a plea for you basically to turn your kids over to some kind of state-funded program so you can do what you want. When I was growing up and when we first started having kids, we talked about who wants to pursue a career, who can do better, who has a better opportunity. We didn't want to sacrifice our children's well-being. And you know what we decided? We decided it would be better if Terry stayed home. That was a decision that we made between the two of us. I mean, those are the decisions you make, not we want to do whatever we want. Both of us should go to work and the state should pay for our child care because we decided to have children and we could do all this. I mean, it's a complete abrogation of our own personal responsibilities. And it's a look to the government to take care of us at every level.
And let's focus on this one more, because I want to stay on my theme. Let's focus on this one more time. How are they funding that? How do they propose to fund that? They propose to take money out of the very pockets, middle and lower income Alaska families, that they claim to be helping, that they claim to be, serving in by these fights that they're engaged in to increase spending. They're on the one hand, they're saying, we're going to help you. We're from the government. We're here to help you. We're here to spend. We're here to make your life better. Oh, but by the way, you got to give us a bunch of your money. You got to give us a bunch of your money to fund it. And the top 20% who take advantage of childcare, the businesses who take advantage, who Maxine Dybert is saying are benefited by the K through 12 spending. It's great for the Alaska economy. All of those guys, they don't have to pay for it, because we're gonna narrow the base, to pick up from the first segment. We're gonna narrow the base and focus all these costs on middle and lower income Alaska families. It is the most screwed up fiscal system that you possibly can imagine. And they don't recognize it because they avoid talking about the revenue side. They avoid talking about the other side of the equation. It's like the T accounts that you're taught in basic accounting. It's like the T accounts only have one side. That there isn't another balancing side that is revenue. And if they would just focus, they won't. But if they would just focus on revenue, or if some candidates out there would just focus on the revenues and point out the irony and the inconsistency and the problems created by the revenue approach that we've adopted as a state, I think we'd make progress on the spending side, because people would appreciate that they're getting off scot-free, and that under a fair revenue system they'd have to pay, and they'd go, oh no, maybe I don't want to pay all that money myself. It's great if somebody else is going to fund it, but I don't want to pay all that money myself. Anyway, it's a very, all these fighting statements and all these I'm working for you and all these I'm making the Alaska economy better through K through 12. All of those are just so full of BS, because they're not addressing how they're funding it, and they're not addressing the fact they're taking out from underneath it. But
right. Who pays, right? I mean, that's the thing, and all the things. Janice Park also said, I've watched our teachers who give so much of themselves are left wondering how they'll make ends meet in retirement. I mean, we're all wondering how we're going to make ends meet in retirement. I mean, if you think this is strictly a teacher thing, but that's, again, a call for defined benefits and more childcare and more this and more government programs and more SNAP benefits and more, and it's just always, and again, who pays? Who pays for this? Edgman does mention in this Alaska Public article that oil prices are down to $73 a barrel. When they left Juneau, it was at 80, maybe pushing up towards 90. But if it stays where it's at right now, they're going to start out with a deficit this year, which again goes back. We were talking about that 10-year forecast from the governor. It's deficits as far as the eye can see.
Huge
and yet they're still talking about, well, we're just going to spend more, right? We're just going to get more. And who pays? Nobody's ever asked that question.
There are really two candidates. I focus on Park and Weatherly as being the worst candidates. There are two candidates who are really good candidates, solid candidates. And if people haven't made up their mind, I would urge them, if they're in those districts, to vote for them. One is Ben Carpenter, who frankly, against the grain as a Republican, went out there and and has proposed a much more equitable revenue system. None of this, base shifting that Nils talks about. Just a very flat, across the board, equitable revenue system that takes less from Alaska. It actually takes less from like 95% of Alaska families. The sales tax, Ben's sales tax does, than PFD cuts. It's more beneficial for 95% of Alaska families than PFD cuts. He's one, and Agnes Moran in the first district down in Ketchikan is the second, who has talked about the same sort of need to address fiscal policy. Everybody else, in all honesty, is just whistling in the wind. I mean, the Democrats who want to spend more, the Republicans who don't want to spend more, but they don't want to revise the existing revenue system that we have and just keep relying on PFD cut, implicitly keep relying on PFD cuts. They're part of the problem. They're not part of the solution.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We are going to take a break. We're going to come back with number 3, AIDEA, and AKLNG, and the North Slope. And I mean, some of this stuff, you just can't make it up. You just can't make it up. All right, we're going to continue the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Brad Keithley, our guest. Frank says, what? Who pays? I thought it was free. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's just this whole idea of, I think a lot of these people would just be happy if they created this dependency state where, we all lived here at the largesse of the government. And of course, the only people that could afford to live here were the ones who were either working for the government, contracted with the government, or living on the largesse of the government. Everybody else is going to have to leave because they can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah, it was Bryce's thing. I mean, everyone knows that the cost of living is escalating. It's really getting expensive out there on just every possible front. Okay, so there's two pieces. There's two parts to that. One is the costs are going up. Okay, yeah, we got to deal with that. Second is the revenue you have in your pocket as an individual to pay for the increased costs. And while Bryce is, trying to spend more government money to make your costs less, he's doing it. Let's be clear. He's doing it at the expense of taking money out of your pocket to finance it, out of the pocket of working Alaska families to finance it. You're not gaining. What's happening is as Michael said, you're becoming more and more and more dependent on the state. You're not gaining as an individual. You're falling behind as an individual and as a family. So it's just the inconsistency, the irony, the hypocrisy, whatever word I use at any given segment, is just breathtaking here.
Yeah. Well, and this is what we've been talking about on this program for 25 years, that we don't have a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. But it has gone on so long that now we have both a spending and a revenue problem, right? I mean, that's the thing, that they would always frame it as, oh, well, we don't have a spending problem. We just need more revenue. Well, if I said that to my banker, he would say, "Oh, no more credit cards for you. I don't have a spending problem. I've just got a revenue problem. What do I do?" Well, you stop spending. But I mean, again, it's for the good, Brad. Don't you? Why do you hate children?
Their spending problem is creating the revenue problem. I mean, not just in the broad sense of we're spending more than we have, but it by how they're funding the spending, they're creating an additional problem. They're creating a problem where middle and lower income Alaska families are being targeted. I mean, Nils talked about the local governments being targeted by these exemptions. The legislatures and others are creating this problem where they're targeting middle and lower income Alaska families. I mean, think about this cycle, right? Think about this cycle that's going on. PFD cuts increase poverty. They increase poverty more than any other government revenue approach. They increase poverty. So now we got more people in poverty because we're using PFD cuts. Now we got to have more government spending. And how are we going to finance the increased government spending that we have to have because we have more poverty? We're going to increase PFD cuts and throw more people into poverty. It's a cycle that's just sending us down a hole, and nobody seems, well, Ben and Agnes, but very few seem to identify it, much less have solutions for it.
Well, and you're not just whistling in the dark here. I mean, we talked about the exodus, the outflow of people from the state is made up primarily of middle income and, kind of the blue collar, medium to low pay people. And we actually had an increase in high paying people, and they're just here for the free ride, essentially. Ron just said the issue with what you said, Michael, is that the government is a consumer and not a producer. So where is the government employees' pay going to come from? Well, that's why Alaska is unique, because the government pay doesn't come from the private sector like it would in any other state through some form of revenue taxation on the private economy. It's directly coming to the government from the permanent fund and from oil revenues. So they don't care what happens in the private economy. That's what I'm saying. So if the middle and lower income people move out, so much better for them, because they've got more money to spend and less that they have to spend on social safety nets for those people, and they could do whatever they want. Mary Peltola is going to fix the lack of high-paying jobs in Alaska. She has fixed it, apparently. I mean, because that's what's coming into Alaska is high-paying jobs. It's the lower-paying jobs that are outflowing Alaska.
Yeah, it's this waffles, or this bounces through so many different things. I mean, you're absolutely right about the outflow, the outmigration being in the working class, the middle and lower income classes, the outmigration being in working Alaska families, those age 65 and below that are in the middle and lower income brackets. That's where we're losing people, and yet, we're addressing it by making the problem worse, by saying we need to spend more in government, by taking more out of the pockets of the very people that are leaving.
It makes total sense to me. Donna says perhaps it's by design. I mean, that's the thing. Maybe it's a feature, not a bug. Welcome back to the program. It is Tuesday. The weekly top three continues. This is the final of the weekly top three. And today we get to revisit one of the weirdest things that every time I look at this, I go, why? AIDEA and ANWR. They're about to break off $20 million in a sale for leases on places that no oil company decided they wanted to try and buy leases on. Brad, this whole thing just boggles my mind. So hit me with it here.
It does. We all remember back when Bill Walker was governor, right? And Bill Walker proposed the AKLNG project, and the state taking over the project from Exxon. I still remember reports of that meeting from my friends in the industry. Bill Walker saying, "Okay, well, the state will just take it over." if you're not going to press it fast enough, if you, Exxon and BP aren't going to press it fast enough, the state will just take it over. And I remember all the statements at the time from, including Dunleavy, from others that, hey, if private industry doesn't want to invest in something, it's not worth doing. The state shouldn't be trying to supplant private industry by spending state money, state resources on a project if private industry doesn't want to go forward with that project. And now, in a Republican administration with Dunleavy as governor, we're doing exactly that. In the first round of the ANWR leases, AIDEA, the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority, a state agency, was one of the bidders in the ANWR lease round. There were a couple of oil companies, small oil companies. None of the majors thought it was worthwhile to go in and make the investment in bidding on the leases. None of the major oil companies did that. A couple of small oil companies did, and AIDEA did. As it went on, the two oil companies dropped out, took back their bids, and took back the money they had put down for the bids, and left AIDEA, a state agency, as the only bid leaseholder in off the ANWR bid. The Biden administration unwound the lease sale, and AIDEA got its money back, although it's litigating that it should still be able to do that. Now we're coming up on the second round of the legislation that Lisa inserted in the 2017 tax bill, requiring 2 rounds of leases in ANWR. We're coming up on the second round by the end of the year, and AIDEA has appropriated $20 million out of its budget, which is funded by the state. Let's be clear about that. AIDEA gets its money from the state. Has appropriated $20 million toward bidding again in ANWR. No indication that there's any private bidders any longer who are interested in bidding in ANWR, even if Trump is elected, and even if he says we're going to open ANWR. Industry who looks at these things for the long term, particularly Alaska projects, for the long term, because they are long cycle projects as opposed to the short cycle shale oil that you find down in the Southwest U.S. The industry who looks at these things as long lived are going to say, okay, well, Trump's going to be president for a while, and then he's not going to be president, and somebody else is going to be president. And the way these cycles go, we'll have somebody back in from the Democrat side, and the Democrats will close it down. And I will have invested all this money, potentially invested all this money in trying to develop my leases in ANWR, and then it'll get shut down. And so I'm not going to make that initial investment. I've got better places to put my money. AIDEA, on the other hand, state government, seeing industry hesitant to put money into ANWR, is going ahead and proposing to put state money into the lease sale. Look, let's go back to it. We were exactly right. Those who said back in the Walker administration, if private industry doesn't think that it's worth doing, we shouldn't be investing state money in something if private industry doesn't think it's worth doing. Those people were exactly right.
Right.
And they ought to remember what they said now, that we're talking about AIDEA doing. AIDEA was set up to help private business in the state, to make loans, to do things that would help the development by private industry. Now, AIDEA in this format is replacing private industry. It's stepping up and saying, well, private industry won't do it, so we'll do it. We don't have to pay for it because it's state money. We got it from the legislature.
Right.
None of our money's at risk, so we'll step up and do it. And it's just that we have a very short-term memory going on here between what happened during the Walker administration and what's happening now.
Well, what's the end game? What's the end game here? They buy the leases, and they hold them. And do they try to sell them? I mean, if nobody was interested in bidding on the leases to begin with, do they try and make them attractive and sell them at a loss? Do they, what's the end game here? We're going to spend $20 million on leases that nobody else wants to buy. What are we going to do with them?
There isn't an end game. I mean, no, you can't sell them at enough of a loss to make them attractive. The problem industry has with ANWR is if they invest $1, that dollar is going to be lost when our election politics go through the next cycle and we have another Democrat administration in there. That dollar is going to be lost. So they don't want to put that dollar there when they can put that dollar down in shale oil, or they can put that dollar someplace else in the world and have that dollar actually return money. There's no way the state can make it attractive unless the state says, look, not only will we give you the leases, not only will we take a loss by paying for the leases and then giving them to you, but we'll also subsidize you by making the investment for you too. And that way your money's not at risk. It's our money at risk. And if there's ever any return, you get that. But in the meantime, it's only our money at risk. And there's no loss you can take other than just completely underwriting the whole thing. And geez, I hope to hell we wouldn't be in that position. I mean, completely. That is exactly what Walker proposed to do with the LNG project. And now we'd have Republicans proposing to do that with the upstream. There's one other thing I want to mention in that regard before we run out of time.
Sure.
And it relates to this in a way, and it also helps drive industry's perception about the slope. Santos recently made an announcement that was given great fanfare in Alaska about being 60% or 63% or there was a 6 in front of it, some percent complete with the Pikka project, and how great that was and how much progress they were making, all of which is true. But here's a part that didn't get highlighted in Alaska, and I picked up on it by reading the Australian Financial Review. The headline in the Australian Financial Review about that same sort of period of announcement by Santos of what was going on with Pikka was Santos reveals 20% cost blowout at Alaska project. That the initial budget that Santos proposed with respect to the Pikka project is now 20% higher as they evaluate the costs. So we're 60% through, 20%. The budget has already gone up 20%. We got 40% remaining. Sometimes that's the hardest 40%. And analysts are expecting that budget to go up even more. So when you think about the North Slope, not only are you thinking about what's going to happen in administrations and what's going to happen down the road, you're thinking about what Santos is experiencing in terms of a 20% cost blowout with respect to the development of their project. Now, Santos claims it's still economic. It still is going to produce excellent returns, even with the 20% cost blowout. Analysts are a little shaky about that. But Santos still claims it's going to be a great project. I'd say the same thing if I was 60% in and I had shareholders questioning me.
Yeah, I'm hip deep in it already. It's going to be great. Trust me, it's going to be fine.
But those are the sorts of things that affect the decisions of private companies about whether to make investments on the North Slope and whether to bid on ANWR. AIDEA's got none of that going on. AIDEA's just saying, hey, it's a project inside the bounds of Alaska. I want to throw state money at it. And it's as bad from that side as Bryce Edgman and others are from, I just want to spend more on this. It's the Republican version of, I want to spend more money, not addressing the revenue side. I want to spend more money. I just want to spend it on different things.
Yeah, I just don't understand, with no end game in sight. I mean, other than just turning it over to some company and then subsidizing them in their development of it, which, I mean, if that's the only way it makes financial sense, we should stop immediately. That's what we should do. When they first did this and they first made that first bid, I was like, why? Why are you bidding against private industry? Because again, two small players were already bidding on it. Why would you go in there and try and compete against them? You're not an oil company. Why would you do? And then when they dropped out and they're like, oh, great, we're going to get it all. And I'm like, what are you going to do with it? What's the plan? There is no plan. It's like there's a bunch of people getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to sit around and plan how to spend your money on stuff that they're not going to do anything with. right? I mean,
Yeah.
the AIDEA guy, what the top guy there makes 300,000 something a year. I mean, what are we doing here, Brad?
Well, I mean, the crass view of this is we're trying to score political points. What Dunleavy has wanted to do is put himself in position to have those leases and then complain about the Biden administration closing them down. And so it's sort of a $20 million campaign contribution to himself to be able to put himself in position to complain about those things. I mean, that's fundamentally what's going on here. There's no business purpose being served by these. I mean, the most charitable business view that you can take about what AIDA is doing is they're trying to convert federal leases into state leases, federal lands, federal oil and gas mineral estate into state oil and gas mineral estate by the state essentially buying it,
Right.
buying the rights to it from the federal government. That's the most charitable view. But then the question is, as you well put it, what the hell are you going to do with it? All right, so we converted it into state lands, but nobody wants to develop it because there's still federal approvals that have to be achieved in order to develop those now state lands, and nobody has faith that the federal government is going to be consistent enough over the decades that you have to recover your money, that the federal government is going to be consistent enough to result in being able to achieve the returns that you want to achieve. So you've turned undevelopable federal lands into undevelopable state lands. That's what you've done. And so it's just, there is no business plan to this, Michael. And it's for the very same reason that we complained about the Walker pipeline plant. There is no business plan. There is no end game that justifies the investment of the funds. $20 million, in the big scheme of things, it's
Okay.
it's just $20 million, not billions at least, or it's not
Right.
trillions.
Well,
at
I
least.
mean, it maybe chump change to you, but 20 million could change my life, right? I mean, let's talk about it. 20 million here, 20 million there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money.
Yeah, and it's and the purpose of it, I mean, if it was 20 million, even if it was 20 million in the stock market if it was in the hands of the permanent fund, and the permanent fund said we've spotted this stock that has a 1 in 30 chance of paying off, but if it pays off huge, we're going to invest $20 million in that. Maybe that would be understandable, but it's the permanent fund and investment analysts and people who understand that sort of thing making a judgment about a risk averaged, or a risky investment. They think the potential is worth the risk. AIDA has no risk profile on this. I mean, AIDA's just $20 million out the door. We get bragging rights to be able to complain about the federal government's failure with respect to ANWR. Dunleavy gets to go on Fox, or gets to go on Bloomberg, or gets to go on whatever the heck he goes on, and complain about the federal government shutting down Alaska development because Alaska bought these leases. That's it. I mean, that's what we're getting out of the $20 million. We're getting talking points for Dunleavy's campaign to be Interior Secretary, or whatever the heck he wants to be in the Trump administration. That's what we're getting for the $20 million. And we just, if AIDA wants to make a risk weighted investment of $20 million, a high risk investment of $20 million, give the money to the permanent fund. Give the money to the permanent fund investment analysts to spend that $20 million. We'll have a better chance of getting something out of it than AIDA spending.
We'll get a return at least. I mean, again, with no plan, it's just you might as well just set the money on fire at this point, because without a plan, it doesn't make any sense. All right, Brad, wrap up here. Final thoughts for today. All this irony. I mean, it's ironic how much irony there is around here going on, right? Final thoughts here.
Well, people just aren't. I mean, Alaska is replete with politicians who don't think of both sides. They think about the spending side, but not how to pay for it. And by not thinking about how to pay for it, or not addressing how to pay for it equitably, they're undoing the spending side. They're making the lives of the people they claim to be trying to help worse. It's the same thing with respect to with respect to Nils's article. He's trying to complain about the impact on local government of creating all these set asides with respect to the tax base, but he's not thinking about the same thing that's going on at the state level and the impact that's having at the state level. We need to think. I mean, what I hope these segments are is thinking through the whole thing, not just oh, good, I got a talking point. I've got AIDEA leases now I can complain about. I've got this, I've got that I can complain about. You need to think through the whole thing.
Well, maybe somebody's listening. I don't know. We've been doing this for a long time, Brad. I'm hoping somebody's listening somewhere. Anyway, appreciate you coming in. Thanks for being part of it today. We appreciate it.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me. Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the weekly top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week on the weekly top 3.